Thank you. It's a huge honor to be here with you and see so many friends and esteemed colleagues. And even our dean of the Eisenberg School came all the way from Massachusetts, and one of our wonderful benefactors, Diane Eisenberg. I even have one of my former Ph.D. students who's either in London when he's not in Athens or Sydney, what have you, Stavros Siokos. Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Tuesday morning, I taught my transportation logistics class, then we zoomed to Boston Logan and made it to London, okay, and here I am. Deep gratitude to the Royal Society for this wonderful venue, and also to the Operational Research Society for this great honor. I would also be remiss not to acknowledge my wonderful students and collaborators who have made this academic journey so incredibly rewarding. Teaching is always very, very special and very, very dear to me. I'd like to give you a background. This is going to be very much a panoramic presentation. Okay, I've been obsessed with NetwORks, I think, for many, many years. So I'd like to give you highlights of some of the applications and specifically how they relate to policies. I truly believe that OR is working to save people and the world. Okay, we have immense challenges ahead of us, but I think we are up to it. I'll be talking about different kinds of applications, from perishable product supply chains to food supply chains, and on different levels, even in terms of international trade, even touch on cybercrime and cybersecurity, and let you know how I got interested in that area. And I will also be talking about something which I think resonates very much with the Operational Research Society, and that is how to communicate with the public, interact with decision makers, and elicit positive change. I think that's very, very important. So background and inspiration. When I'm giving the Blackett lecture, I think it's important because not everyone might know who Dr. Blackett was, okay? He was a phenom, I think, an absolutely brilliant man and a Renaissance man. And he was instrumental in obviously forming the first operational research teams during World War II. In the United States, when we talk about OR, it's operations research, but in Britain, it's operational research. And he was also very involved in using radar for different kinds of applications and in identifying German submarines, okay? In the US, we typically talk about George Dantzig being the father of OR, and also Philip Morse, okay? But his achievements were phenomenal. He was also recognized with the Nobel Prize in Physics, okay? And this, I think, is very important, okay? A quote, okay? I like to learn from these, amazing minds and personalities. It says, the scientist's responsibility to society and the public's need to understand scientific or technical evidence supporting or calling into question public policies. He truly epitomized, the 20th century scientist as public citizen. He was one of the first 4 founders of the OR Club in 1948 that became the well-known Operational Research Society, which we're now celebrating many, many years, including the publication, the first issue of the OR Journal, okay, which is the flagship journal, the Journal of the Operational Research Society. We had the first conference taking place in Harrogate, and it's wonderful to even see colleagues here from Lancaster University that I'm very, very fond of, okay, and that's where we had the first chair, which was, quite remarkable. And I had to have a photo myself with George Dantzig. Not only was his wife named Anna, his mother was named Anna. And amazingly, when he passed away, Informs wrote obituary of him in ORMS Today. I wasn't his PhD student, but we were friends. And there was a photo of me with George, okay, which was very, very touching. Okay, and Philip Morse from MIT, also a physicist. Okay, so there's a story behind this. I'll be showing you my academic genealogy, which I think will impress you. It impressed me. Okay, when Philip Morse wrote his very, very famous book, in the beginnings. He said, the delights of research in OR, okay, are multiple. Okay, to me, the pleasure coming from understanding how traffic behaves, okay, we're very good at traffic here in London, okay, is as great as that coming from understanding how two atoms combine. Right? In addition, the practical applications of OR theory are often immediate and satisfying. And he ends his book with the following statement. For those who like exploration, have that kind of curiosity about the world, immersion in scientific research is not unsocial, it's not dehumanizing. In fact, it's a lot of fun. Okay? And in the end, if one is willing to grasp the opportunities, it can enable one to contribute something to human welfare, which we're seeing many of our honorees have done an outstanding job in. So I think the founders of OR would be thrilled to see the accomplishments of our field, okay? And in terms of methodologies, in terms of applications, different disciplines tend to love our methodologies, okay? They help them in dramatic ways. And also, here we've influenced industry, government, defense, healthcare, high tech, consultancies, education, sports analytics, and even nonprofit organizations. See, the wealth of applications is just phenomenal, okay? And it's very, very rewarding. And I also think the fact that students are drawn to our field is extremely, extremely important, okay, to continue building upon the future. Now, interestingly enough, Blackett was involved, he's the director of the Navy and so forth, right? He was worried about German submarines. My first job after graduating Brown with 2 degrees was to work at the Naval Underwater Systems Center. I was 22 years old. I was responsible for learning how to program an ANUYK assembler and to write code so that the US could avoid the Russian submarines, okay, which was a challenging position. But I loved it. I loved working with the high technology and so forth. And the first conference I ever spoke at was in Monterey, California. I was the only female. Most of the other speakers were admirals, okay, so that was interesting. I was the only one in a skirt too, so. Off to grad school, I worked in high-tech consulting. I loved it, absolutely loved it, and I loved doing research in that domain as well. But I very quickly realized I did not like having a boss. Okay, I had a 3-year project that I finished in 3 months, and my supervisor said, Anna, what are we going to do with you now? I said, well, please give me more work. I like this work, but you need the contracts and so forth. So I decided to go and pursue my Ph.D. full-time. And at that time, there was only one female professor at Brown University in OR, and they counted her twice because she was the only female in the division of applied mathematics and the only female in the division of engineering. Okay, so we got 2 female full professors, but it was just Stella. She was phenomenal. And when I write papers, I still hear her voice. I don't know how many of you hear your advisor's voice and so on. But very sadly, Stella passed away at the age of 49 of cancer. Okay, left 2 children and so on. And she was one of the very few people honored with an obituary in the premier journal Operations Research, which I wrote. I honestly believe had she lived, she probably would have gotten the Nobel Prize in Economic Science, which was absolutely phenomenal. And only the second female PhD in OR in the US, the first one, the UK, Elsa Land, okay, phenomenal too. So let me tell you that we are truly standing on the shoulders of giants. Okay, one of my former PhD students, when she defended successfully her PhD, she presented me with the academic mathematical achievement theology. So here I am. There's my thesis advisor, DeFermos. You go back and there's Maxwell, UK. Pretty cool. Okay, this is really standing on the shoulders of giants. And notice the physicists too, influence. Then you go back to Newton and Galileo. Truly standing on the shoulders of this, so like no pressure. This is framed in my office. The students come in, I said, well, Okay, and we have, also my PhD students, about 25 of them now, but I couldn't fit them on the slide. Okay, so very impressive. So NetwORks, I absolutely love NetwORks, but I have to then tell you a little bit about decision-making on networks and what makes them, I think, so interesting, different kinds of behavior and so on. So my first love was congested urban transportation networks, and if you can handle that, I think you can do anything. And amazingly, our taxi driver to this location today, I asked him about congestion pricing and what he thinks. He said, actually, we've gotten used to it. It's a good thing. I don't know if you agree, but I thought that was kind of interesting. So from supply chains to even modeling the internet, because there's decentralized decision-making behavior going there. Happening, social networks, financial networks, and in back is my former PhD student. We're the co-authors of the Financial Networks book, and also electrical power generation and distribution networks. Many of these network systems have similar underlying behavior. Okay, it's decentralized and so on, so we work on modeling them and so on. So some of my books, most of my books have a network theme in them. One of the greatest compliments I think I ever got was from a professor at Imperial College, Professor Birch Rustin. He says, Anna, whenever I buy one of your new books, usually I would send him a copy. He says, students take it, they disappear. I think that's fantastic. I think that's absolutely wonderful. So here we have decentralized behavior versus centralized behavior, when you can control flows on the network and try and achieve some sort of an objective, whether you want to minimize costs, maximize profits, minimize environmental emissions and so on, and you get totally different flows, okay, totally different flows. So let me present you just quickly the Bryce paradox. It's a very famous paradox which was developed by Dietrich Bryce, which essentially says that you can add a road and it makes everyone worse off under decentralized behavior. And who would think that, right? You have a network, you have a single origin node C1, destination node 4, you have two paths, right? Path P1 links AC, path P2 links B and D, and you have different travel cost functions, okay, associated with the links. And they're a function of flow, okay? So here, if you have a demand of, say, 6 vehicles per unit of time, and you can see the costs are similar, right? You can see that travelers will distribute themselves. So there'll be 3 vehicles per unit of time on path P1 and 3 on path P2, okay? 83 minutes. Then we add a link, okay? And that induces a new path, path P3 going AED. We have a certain cost there. And I'm going to need some water. I can tell that already. Lad, can you get me some water, please? Okay. And there you can see if you have initially, you would have like 83 minutes, and it'd only be 71 minutes for the third path. Okay. So people will keep on switching until they can't do any better. They decide to choose the route minimizing, right, cost or problem. And they keep on switching, and you get a new user-optimized flow pattern, 2 vehicles per unit of time, each of those paths. And look what happens, the travel cost increases for everyone. Before it took you 83 minutes to go to work, now it takes you 92 minutes to get to work. Okay, this is the very famous Bryce paradox. So here, who would think? He wrote this paper in 1968 and it was published in German. No one had invited him to give a talk on the famous paradox, okay, until we did at the Eisenberg School. And he contacted us, and this was my then student, who's now a professor at Vienna University of Economics and Business, Tina Wackelmingo, and there I am, and there's Professor Bryce. We translated the article from German to English. You never know the kinds of talents you will need, right, in your future. Okay, it was published in our Informed Journal of Transportation Science, and also with the preface of how he got the idea. He had been in a lecture, there was a professor lecturing, and something bothered him, okay? And he went home and essentially rediscovered what we call in transportation user optimization and system optimization, and constructed his famous paradox, okay? So he came to the Eisenberg School in the month of March. We hosted him for a couple of days. My students took him to beer halls. The weather wasn't good, but it was wonderful, okay? Wonderful, wonderful experience. And interestingly, we have the Bryce Paradox happening around the world. Okay, we had, for example, in Stuttgart, Germany, the congestion was so bad, they had a road at it, they actually removed it. We had a case in New York City, and it was on Earth Day when they closed 42nd Street and travel time actually improved. And one of the most dramatic examples was in Seoul, Korea, where they actually dug up the 6-lane highway, resurrected the original road, and not only did air quality improve, but travel time also. Okay, so one has to take into consideration the network topology, the costs, the demands, and obviously the behavior of users on networks. Otherwise, you can make bad decisions, bad policies. Building more roads doesn't always lead to improved travel times. Okay, so very important. And then Bryce on Broadway. Okay, we had Mayor Bloomberg who decided to actually shut down Broadway from 42nd Street to 47th Street. You know, many people were like up in arms, how can this possibly work? Well, even the taxi drivers ended up liking it. There was a lot of discussion at the beginning because some of the tourists and so forth didn't like the plaza, they didn't like the plastic chairs, the colors and so forth. And even when the next mayor came in, DiBiagio tried to get rid of it, and people argued, no, you need to keep that. And you can see the topology is kind of similar, which is really, really interesting. So you do this, and the Bryce Paradox has been discovered in other cities around the world. It's a topic that has fascinated not only operations researchers, but economists, computer scientists, sociologists, physicists, and so forth. Okay? And this was in mid-March, an episode that was being taped with me. He's a Survivor winner, Yul Clone. He got like $1 million. It's a TV reality show, but also a Stanford grad, and he's had courses in game theory, so he gets the Bryce Paradox. So you can even see the episode. It was freezing. That's why I had the coat, but it was fascinating to talk about. But if you have, you know, a single objective function that you're optimizing, okay, and you have centralized behavior, you'll never have the paradox occur. Okay, so if you build more and so forth, you want to minimize total cost. The cost can never get worse. Okay, it might not change, but so on. So we also have, you know, cases of the Bryce paradox occurring on the internet and also in electric power networks as well as in supply chain networks. So I want to emphasize congestion is not a new phenomenon. It actually dates back to Roman times, and Caesar was pretty smart. He actually instituted a policy, a time of day chariot control policy to kind of spread out the traffic, okay? Which is very good. He doesn't charge them, but he just controlled them and so on. And Bill Vickrey, a Nobel laureate, okay, in economic science, this sadly, it was announced that he got the Nobel Prize, but then he was driving to a conference from New York City to Cambridge and got killed. He had an accident, he died, okay, so that was sad. But he essentially got the Nobel Prize for his work on congestion pricing, and Stella DeFermo was my thesis advisor, also did a lot of work. And policies have been implemented here in Gothenburg. I was involved in that one. We're now battling in New York City. Okay, the governor approved it, and she pushed back, and now I think they're going to reinstitute congestion pricing, but probably not on the level of modeling that you actually need to change behavior. Okay, but she needs the money. And what about supply chains? Okay, much of my recent work, I would say last 15, 20 years has been on supply chains. And here the applications are vast, they're fascinating. Students love the topics, as do like public officials, and I would say also media and journalists, okay? Supply chains are hot. We have COVID to thank for that, you know, which is, you know, not grateful for much, but definitely bringing supply chains to the fore. And whether we're dealing with manufacturing of automobiles, okay, or healthcare products, which are perishable, toys, fast fashion, food supply chains, what have you, you'll have different networks underlying them, different kinds of behavior, different kinds of cost structure, and it's fascinating to compare. Okay, and learn from them too. So what we're seeing about supply chain networks today is the large-scale nature. We have congestion. Think of what's happening in the Panama Canal, for example, or even now, because the Houthis are attacking in the Red Sea, many of the ships have to be traveling, around the southern tip of Africa. It's adding about 2 weeks to maritime shipping as well as costs. Much is happening now. And also very important to realize, I founded the Virtual Center for Super Networks. And in fact, when I publish the book, a lot of times when I write a book, there's an associated disaster with it. So the Super Networks book was actually stuck at the JFK airport because it was 9/11. That was horrible. Finally, it got pushed out and so on, and made it to our publisher, Edward Elgar in Cheltenham, United Kingdom. Okay. So we have networks that interact with each other. If something happens to the internet or electric power, it's going to affect financial networks, like electric power networks, airline networks, and so on. So that's really important to see how they interact with one another and how do you model, which is what we do. And in addition, policies surrounding networks might have many kinds of ramifications socially, politically. Where do you add a particular node? A manufacturing node, or maybe a noxious facility, right? What about a nuclear power plant and so on? And also security-wise, okay? But when we represent, I think, supply chains and networks, you can see commonalities, you can see differences. Decision makers like to see pictures, right? Visualization and so forth. And these graphical representations, I think, are very, very effective, okay? And we also have very efficient algorithms, which is important. Something else that I would argue, and I think that's fairly also a standard in the Operational Research Society, and it comes from our history too. We work in multidisciplinary teams because different problems need different approaches, different disciplines. And in terms of many of the applications of supply chains that we're involved in, they're perishable. Okay? We work on blood supply chains, pharmaceutical supply chains, food supply chains, even medical nuclear supply chains. We developed some of the first models for medical nuclear supply chains. So there you need different types of expertise. You need chemistry knowledge, you might need biology knowledge, physics knowledge, and so forth, sometimes electrical engineering knowledge and so forth. And that's very, very important. So all the classes the students take as an undergrad, you never know when you're going to be applying in the future, and that's important. So here are just some examples of network topologies, okay, associated with, for example, we have pharmaceuticals, okay, supply chain. Here we've done work for the American Red Cross of a regionalized blood bank, and there you would have a kind of a system optimization problem. But blood gets tested, right? And if it has certain viruses and bacteria, it gets discarded, and so on. And here we have the network topology of a medical nuclear supply chain, which is actually a hazardous waste, and it's actually dangerous and so forth. And many nuclear power plants that were irradiating these medical nucleotides are not functioning well, okay? They're getting mothballed, so lots of challenges in this area, okay? In addition, our work on quality is something that resonates with me. So regularly we'll see in the news. I mean, recently it's been McDonald's raw onions, people getting sick and so forth. Okay? Then it was carrots, and one thing after another. So product quality is extremely important. How do you model product quality? How do you model that in terms of food applications? And these are just some of the examples of, and it's horrible, when there wasn't enough infant formula in the United States because they only had like one manufacturing plant, okay? And finally, it was decided to bring some of the infant formula from the European Union. That hurts. We shouldn't be having such product failures, okay? And what can we do? So we work on minimum quality standards and issues like that. And here are some examples of topologies that we have. And you model not just manufacturing firms, but also freight service providers having different kinds of modes, different kinds of demand markets, and say decision makers across a tier of supply chain might be competing, but they have to cooperate at different levels. Otherwise, the goods won't flow, right? You won't have agreement with prices and so on. So these are some examples. And also, if you look at a supply chain network, you might think of, what is the most important node? Okay, right? We've had all sorts of disasters, the Fukushima triple disaster, where we didn't have access to black paint, for example, for a while. We had all sorts of floods in Thailand where we didn't have, high processing computer chips and so on. So it's very important. So we have measures on that too, okay, how to apply. But what about food supply chains? Food is, I think one of our favorite things, okay? And especially when it came to the pandemic, we saw all sorts of negative impacts on food supply chains. And now we're seeing Russia's war in Ukraine and other types of disasters. So we began working on fresh produce supply chains in terms of perishability, I would say about 2012 in a paper I published with one of my doctoral students at the Eisenberg School. It received recognition from actually the editorial board. We had a topology that looked like this. We had different food firms involved in manufacturing a similar kind of product. Okay, you might have different production facilities, different transportation modes. Ultimately, you would have different distribution centers and then distribution to the final demand markets or retail outlets. And associated with each link would be an arc multiplier that would capture, based on what was happening on that link, how much of the food would arrive at the next point, how much of it would be discarded, okay? And we'd also have waste costs. And these would be competing firms interested in maximizing profits and also possibly minimizing waste to a certain degree. And then we went further with another Eisenberg School Ph.D. student, Danius Basic, where we actually worked with food scientists to figure out formulas associated with quality of food, fresh produce for fruits and vegetables, based on the humidity, based on the temperature that is refrigerated on, and so forth. And consumers would react at farmers markets based on the prices they were willing to pay for the quality of the fresh produce. Okay, so these were oligopolistic market equilibrium problems. And we also went further and published a paper in European Journal of Operational Research where you could have minimally processed produce like carrots, cantaloupes, and so forth. And consumers would respond to the different types of fresh produce. And farmers would then interact also with the processors and so on. Okay? So what happened in COVID, I think, was so dramatic. And especially it hurt me tremendously to see that fresh produce was rotting in the fields in the US and Australia and Europe because you didn't have the migrant labor, they didn't come and work. Meat processing workers were dying in the US because the workers weren't being supported enough. They were working so closely to each other, they still had the pressure and so on. And then farmers at the same time had to cull cattle, okay, and pork, chickens, and so on, because their animals weren't getting processed fast enough. Okay, so you see these complex supply chains. So this got me a lot. And I saw, in so much of our work on supply chains, not just a matter of manufacturing widgets and so on. You have to bring in that human element. And labor is extremely important in how you take care of labor and how you pay labor and how productive is labor and so on. And can you move labor around? So started researching that and wrote an invited article for the Informs magazine, RMS Today, that in the end is really all about people. So the first paper that I wrote that included labor and supply chains, focused on a system optimization model of a fresh produce supply chain where you would have bounds of labor available on different lengths. Okay, so what would that do? Okay, in terms of prices, in terms of profits, and then you could play around and do all sorts of sensitivity analysis. So that would be kind of the network topology. And you could see also we had direct links from production, because that was happening. A lot of farmers were just selling their produce essentially in front of their farms, right? And you were paying via Venmo or PayPal or what have you. And that would help tremendously. But still, one could find that just lack of labor on a single link would have a dramatic effect on prices and also on flows, so that would affect food security. And preserving productivity was so important, and I think a lot of bigger farmers realize they have to take care of the workers. They provided better housing for them, better working conditions, and so on. And also enhancing marketing could help a lot in terms of profits and so on. So then started thinking, okay, we had so many industries competing for workers in the pandemic, right? We had nurses traveling around the US from hospital to hospital because there were shortages of healthcare workers. There were shortages of truckers, many shortages. So started working on competition for labor in different kinds of scenarios. And then it was a paper that was also published in eJOR and was recognized with an editor's award. So here we had multiple competing firms, competing in terms of the products that they produce, but also in terms of the labor that they need. And in a first set of scenarios, we would have upper bounds on labor availability on different links. Then we had, say, a labor availability across a tier, and they would compete. And what if you had a certain amount of labor available and the people had different skill sets and they could move around? And that I found fascinating because that was actually happening in Sweden because many weren't flying. SAS wasn't flying its planes. And they were having their crews retrain as healthcare workers. Okay, totally different supply chains and use of labor. And these problems actually resulted in methodological advances too. You no longer were just using a Nash equilibrium concept, well, we needed to use a generalized Nash equilibrium because the firms were competing for labor with a fixed amount. Okay, so they had common shared constraints. So that was interesting. I'm fascinated by applications that drive innovations and methodologies. I've had students at UMass undergrads. They're absolutely fearless folks, okay? They write their dissertations, and they have time constraints, right? Because they have to graduate. But they say they want to work on a certain problem, like in disaster management and so forth. And, that has never been solved. How do we solve it? We had time. We did it. 3 a.m, we're working back and forth, and students publish papers, and that's very gratifying. So we saw through these studies, we can do so many sensitivity analysis results, right? In the network topology, you can add nodes, remove nodes, add links, remove links, change cost functions, change supply price functions, demand price functions, and so on. But it became clear that we should do everything possible to secure, the health of workers, to maintain their productivity and so on, okay? And obviously keep them employed with good wages. So went further, and in the pandemic, I published a book, I think, with 13 chapters, and it even has a chapter on the use of migrant labor and so forth, okay, and paying fair wages. It has a chapter on red blood cell supply chains and healthcare workers, and also disaster management. How can you work together to accomplish greater good? Okay, so what about that? Who would think that, stolen credit cards are perishable? Right? They actually are. Okay, and I'll tell you a story. But how did I get interested in cybersecurity? Usually I assume kind of rational decision makers, for the most part, they want to do some good as well, okay? But here I actually had to get into the criminal mind, which was interesting. One of my books called appropriately fragile networks, identifying vulnerabilities and synergies in an uncertain world, was written with a former PhD student. And within 3 days, he got his PhD, the book was published, and he and his wife had a son, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. Well, this book, within hours of being sent to our publisher, they put, the electronic copy, it got hacked. And copies put all around the world, okay, various IP addresses, and we found it out. Okay, in a way, I think, okay, I mean, someone wants to read your book, it's actually a compliment that it's getting copied, but my PhD student, he wanted the royalties. So we wrote to John Wiley, which is a very good high-tech publisher. They said, okay, we'll get our legal department involved and we'll issue cease and desist letters. How much good will that do, right? Okay, and so on. So probably get the copy. But it got me interested in, cybersecurity and cybercrime. Okay, how do you get into cybercrime? And we ended up getting quite a few grants working in this area. But I've been subject to ransomware and so forth, so I kind of want to stay away from this. So we're thinking of credit cards, and there's data on that. Actually, it's a perishable product. Okay? After a certain number of days, the value decreases, and you can even figure out why the value decreases because it's harder to fence them, right? So we did a model which was kind of based on a spatial price equilibrium model where you have different kinds of credit cards, okay? Different supply points, like banks and so on, different demand points, who's willing to buy them, okay? And costs associated with getting these and the prices. And then the prices that the consumers were willing to pay for these cards. And based on time, how they would decrease. Okay? So it's very, very interesting work. And we've done other work in game theory and cybersecurity and investing in cybersecurity and the payoff. But a lot of financial services firms, they don't want to admit when they're hacked and so forth. And obviously, right, because of the competition and the customers and so on, but they could gain much more if they were to cooperate and talk to each other. So on. So what about international trade? I've been talking about farmers, food farms and so forth, but we're living in a globalized economy, right? Where we have products coming from all around the world, supplies coming from all around the world, being assembled in different parts and so on. And now on top of that, we're living in very interesting political and economic times because of tariffs are back in the news, and I'll touch on that as well. You look at the largest importers in the world. I was in Oxford. I was a visiting fellow when Brexit happened. We were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Visiting Fellows program. It was a beautiful sunny day. We were all assembled and so on. And the news came. I will never forget that moment. I don't know how you felt, but I took it. Seriously, we weren't happy. And there you go. There's United Kingdom and US and China and so on. And then the largest exporters around the world, China, US, Germany, and so on. So now, okay, we can do these really nice trade models and so forth, but you really want to figure out, the impacts of policies on that. And some of the most popular policies now are tariffs. Okay, there were numerous, for example, also export controls, numerous export controls introduced in the pandemic. There are countries such as India didn't want to export their onions and garlic because of the nutritional value, right, for their citizens. Obviously, very few countries were interested in exporting their personal protective equipment. That was very important for their citizens, and so on. So we see, these different kinds of policies. And tariffs, believe me, folks, since the US presidential election result, they're back in the news. Last week, I was interviewed by a journalist for the New York Times, interviewed at 2 o'clock. By 4:30, the article was published. Okay? And there are other interviews that I've been doing, over the last decade or so, having to do with tariffs. And when you think of, 100% tariff, on items coming from China, right, to the US, from Brazil, from India, and 25% tariffs from items or even inputs into production processes coming from Canada or Mexico, that's going to have a huge impact on both producers and consumers. And you need to be able to model that, quantify, and show the results, okay? And that's very, very important. So we work on developing computable operational research models. We'd love to do the mathematics, the modeling, but also the algorithmic development and analyses of policies. How many of you like to code? Okay, so we have some of that. I think it's really fun. It's also challenging research. So, think of in the Uruguay drought in 1996, there were more than 1,300 tariff rate quotas that were instituted on products. This is something you might not even realize. And tariff rate quotas are fascinating to model, right? And also to solve, because essentially you have a quota of a certain product, but if you go above the quota, you can still do it, but you get punished with a tariff. Okay, so it's like a two-tiered tariff, so that's really interesting. But also many of the most important food crops, staples for around the world, Asia, North Africa, and so forth, rice, wheat, corns, bananas, have all been subject to these tariff rate quotas. So we've been working on modeling these tariff rate quotas using an equilibrium analysis, and many of our applications are focused on agricultural products. And also saying, can you relate tariffs to and quotas? And we show that they can have the same result if you do the pricing in a certain way, using like Lagrange multipliers and so on, which is cool. So what about international trade now? I mentioned the Panama Canal, the drought, there's congestion, kind of what's affecting, the flow of goods. We see what's happening in the Red Sea, right? And the Suez Canal. And also so many wars and disruption around the world. And on top of that, we have, climate change that's making things very, very challenging for farmers, for others, for citizens, for peoples of different countries, okay? And also mention Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. I'm Ukrainian. That morning, I was teaching my humanitarian logistics and healthcare class at 8:30, and I had as a guest speaker to Zoom in the head of the United Nations in Armenia. She's a friend of mine, Dr. Denise Sump. She was late a few minutes. She apologized, said, Anna, we were taking part in the UN security meeting on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I don't think I or my students will ever forget that guest lecture. It was horrible. Okay, so we see the challenges, and you have to be able to capture those trade routes, okay, the network representation, or else you're not addressing the problems. You're not helping to solve these problems. So I acknowledge the partnership between the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the Cave School of Economics. Thank you for mentioning that I'm the co-chair of the board of directors of the Cave School of Economics. One of 4 co-chairs, and also Makar Pasanyuk is a fellow co-chair, and he's based in London. So about a month after the full-scale invasion, which is extraordinary, U.S. Amherst started a partnership with KSE. And we've worked with 2 sets of cohorts of virtual scholars based in Ukraine, doing research with them, mentoring them. Just yesterday got an email from one that I'm working with. We've actually published 4 papers together, and he got renewed because he's so good. He's saying, Anna, I bought a generator so I can continue working harder and so forth. I mean, it just breaks my heart, okay? But what we've done, I think, is extraordinary. We also have exchange students at UMass Amherst now from Ukraine. We had 4 last year, and we have 5 this year. And they love us, and that makes us feel really good, okay? So some of our work with Ukrainians, okay, and they do a lot of work on agricultural economics. They're experts, they're very good at accessing data, which helps us too. So we published a series of papers in the Journal of Global Optimization, European Journal of Operational Research, and also transportation science, okay, investigating all sorts of disruptions, okay, and a recent one, which is now it's articles in advance in the Journal of Transportation Science, okay, is a multi-period model of agricultural trade, focusing on Ukraine and the MENA countries, the Middle Eastern, North African countries, in different kinds of scenarios, okay? And with disruptions on transportation links, on storage links, on maritime routes, and so on. The Black Sea, the grain initiative only worked for about a year, and there were a lot of delays, but still grateful to the United Nations and Turkey for getting that to work. And there are extreme challenges, even with different railroad gauges, with you need additional support so the food can transit along the Black Sea, because maritime shipping is definitely the most efficient for agricultural products outside of Ukraine. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe, if not the world. Okay? And people are suffering from heightened food insecurity because you can't get the food that they need, the wheat, the corn, and so on. So our latest paper with Ukrainian co-authors and also one of my Ph.D. students, Dana Hassani, is on uncertainty in war and what happens under different scenarios when you have less land, which is what's happening in Ukraine. That's 1/3 of the land is mine. What's happening if you have reduction in transportation capacity, labor, and so on. Okay. And also measuring, how resilient is Ukraine subject to all these different kinds of disruptions. And it can be applied in other kinds of settings. And this book will be published next month. So we've gained a lot of knowledge through our computational exercises that are based on data that we garner with help from our Ukrainian collaborators. The importance of effective transportation routes is paramount, and they have to be safe and secure. Also, we found what level of subsidies, these are policies, can help Ukrainian farmers, and they can make a huge difference, okay, in terms of how much they're going to produce. Because whenever it's time to plant, they have to decide what to plant based on how much money they might get. They're suffering from a lack of liquidity and so on. But, transportation is so critical, because without transportation, I don't care what's produced where, but it won't get to your destination points. Okay? And there's so many challenges now. And also, we're doing work on, those bananas. That's the most popular fruit in the world. They're produced right in Central America, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and so on. And now it's taking much longer for them to transit during the Panama Canal, and that's affecting their quality and affecting the price and so on. So we've been working on that. What about making a positive impact? Okay. I believe very much in communications and so on. Okay, writing letters to the editor, writing op-ed pieces. I do a lot of writing with what is known as the conversation. I know you have it in the United Kingdom, you have it in Australia, Canada, and so on. If you write an article there, it should be based on science, on actual papers. There are no copyright restrictions, and the article can then get republished, in the Washington Post, New York Times, whoever wants to, Salon, Fast Company, whatever. So whenever I have a few papers on a topic that I think is important and relevant and timely, I will write an article for the conversation, okay? And you can get a lot of visibility then. There's a lot of media platform read, these op-eds and so on, and then you'll be contacted by radio, by TV stations and so on. Also, other journalists and so on. And I think as an educator, it's very important for us to do public outreach, okay? Sometimes I will talk for an hour with a journalist and not even get a line in an article, but I did my job, okay? Other times I will talk 10, 15 minutes and they will, quickly. Okay, and I've gotten fantastic research ideas from journalists too, because sometimes they will stop me and say, Anna, what about this? I said, uh-oh, I haven't thought about it. That's a really good question. So the communication goes both ways, and I enjoy that. Okay, and when it came to the pandemic, I'll show you how I influenced national policy and how quickly. You might think, research you do, it takes forever to get in practice. That's not always the case. Okay. I know as academics, we could see that a lot was happening, right? Before even the World Health Organization declared the COVID pandemic, right, March 11, 2020. And I could see that there were blood shortages in various countries, like in China, Iran, and so on. So I wrote an article on that, how the coronavirus is upsetting the blood supply chain. Okay, that was published March 12th, okay, one day after the declaration by the World Health Organization. And then very soon after, Informs asked me to expand on the article, okay, and publish in Analysts, which is another one of their magazines, which I did, okay. And I'll tell you what happened with that article. And then I continued writing, okay, because even before there was a vaccine officially, I was very worried, again, perishable product supply chains, about the ultra cold supply chain that was needed. And did we have the infrastructure in the US and other parts of the world to keep those vaccines safe, okay, in terms of refrigeration? So I wrote an article about keeping the coronavirus vaccine safe, how to do that during distribution, but very, very important, the safety is so important. And also the competition for medical supplies, for PPEs, was immense in the pandemic. We had the head of our trauma unit at one of our best hospitals in Springfield, Bay State. He drove in the middle of the night to New Jersey, awaiting a shipment of PPEs from China. He was trailed by the FBI. Okay, because they were wondering what he was after and so on. But luckily, he could get the cargo and to protect his healthcare workers. I mean, there were extremes that heroes went to save lives. The competition, auto manufacturers were manufacturing PPEs and so on. Very, very challenging time. And also, we had major logistical challenges, right, in terms of the pandemic, okay, in terms of the cargo containers, something so basic. Thank you, Mr. McLean, for inventing the cargo shipping container. They're standardized and so forth. They were in the wrong places and so on. There weren't enough of them. And this congestion, we didn't have enough truckers to offload and so forth. They were arriving on ships. So I wrote an article about the cargo container, and obviously Ever Given, which blocked the Suez Canal, generated a lot of interest too. And within days, it had like 350,000 reads. I'm not sure any of my papers will ever have that. And it's used in classes around the world. That makes me feel really good, okay? That's what we do in operations, transportation logistics. So I've done media interviews for all of them. I've even done an interview with BBC. I had difficulty with BBC Radio, like 10 at night with the accent, but I think I was okay. And now that the pandemic is kind of behind us, I've been very involved in writing about agricultural impacts, trade impacts of Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And I will continue to do that. I think that's very, very important, because I think we all deserve, peace and prosperity and safety, and have our students and family members, flourish and reach various goals and milestones. And now I'm working on this, hoodies and so forth, because of our research. I've spoken with Al Jazeera, Business Insider, and so on. And luckily, the dock workers' strike was settled within like 3 days, because that would have been horrific in the US. Okay? That was in October, right at the time when we had a special workshop in Washington by the White House on supply chain resilience. Okay? So luckily, but again, you see the people theme, how important people are in the dock workers. So impacting policy. I said I published that conversation article a day after the World Health Organization declared the COVID a pandemic, which they probably should have done sooner. So on April 22, that was just like 5 weeks after my article appeared, there was a memorandum sent by the California Attorney General, Javier Becerra, who is now Biden's head of Health and Human Services, okay, to then the Admiral Brett Giroir, and signed by 21 other U.S. attorneys general, requesting updates and that something should be done about the blood supply chain in the U.S. And it's a different system here, and I know in the UK, and different actually in India and other parts of the world. And my article in the conversation was quoted right on the first page. And one of the attorneys general at that time was Maura Healey, which is now the governor of Massachusetts. So that was very cool. That made me feel really good. However, a lot of things are changing as of January 20th and so forth. And there is a nominee for the Director of Health and Human Services. You've probably heard Kennedy, okay, and so forth. So it's going to be interesting, I think, for all of us how we elicit positive change, okay, over the next couple of months and couple of years. So I will continue to write. I will continue to speak out, work with legislators at the local level, regional level, state level. I'm very lucky that I live in Massachusetts and New England, okay, but it's going to be interesting. I think, new challenges await us. I think we still need investment. You mentioned the book. It's something I care about in women and STEM. A few years ago, I was thrilled to be picked as one, because of my work in NetwORks and network systems, as one of 44 female role models in the book called STEM Gems. It was a brilliant idea by a graduate of MIT, an African-American female chemical engineer named Stephanie Espy. And she traveled to the Eisenberg School in my lab and interviewed me and met with students, photographers, and so on. And this book, it's gone viral. There are camps now and clubs. And when I spoke at Congreso Futuro in January 2019 in Santiago, Chile, I was thrilled that when I was introduced, okay, males considered this my greatest achievement, okay, but this is really good, to motivate girls, young women to get into STEM fields and why, to present them with role models, okay. So I think we should be doing more of that, okay. I think we should be writing more books. And I would like to give credit to the Journal of the Operational Research Society. They did something fantastic, published, first, congratulations on the anniversary, 75 years, that's wonderful. The first discussion paper, that takes a lot of guts. I think other journals were approached and they turned down the idea, and this is due to Paula Carroll and Annunziata Esposito Amadeo. They wrote an article on gender equality, opportunities and challenges for the OR community. Okay? And then they had 12, not all females, write commentaries. Graham wrote a commentary, right? It was fantastic. And that was and it got the discussion rolling. What can we do to, I think, be more inclusive, to be more supportive, and so on. And lots of words of wisdom there. I think I would like to see more books about our field. I had the Sad and Gas book feature early on. They had over 40 operations researchers, but not a single female. And I think that's a mistake, guys. I've been speaking out a lot. We've had, amazing females. I can give you a whole list. We need to recognize them, okay? And writing about them, I think, helps, and talking about them too. So I think our students are highly sought after. So I'm very, very happy about that. Our discipline, is essential to AI, and other kinds of advanced methodologies, and will continue to be. We regularly interact with the media, which I think is important. We have fantastic professional societies from the OR Society, right? IFORS has been mentioned, and also Informs. And also there are female-based societies, okay? But everyone's welcome to join, okay? Worms was mentioned, we have Waron and so on, and that's important. And I think in the pandemic, these societies were phenomenal, organizing all sorts of special seminars from around the world, helping to sustain our very important community. And more of us are being called to advise the government. Harkens to the beginnings of OR, right? Patrick Blackett. Okay, before the election results, I was contacted by the Department of Homeland Security in the US to advise the chief scientist for a 5-year term in terms of national emergencies. It's a great honor. But we're going to have a new head of the Department of Homeland Security, so I'm not sure. We will see. Okay, so it was interesting. Our great profession, discipline arose from many applications and practice. At the recent Seattle Informs meeting, there was a panel. I was on a panel with Tom Magnanti of MIT and also Linus Schrage of the University of Chicago on what does our past tell us about the future. And it was very interesting to hear from Tom Magnanti of MIT saying, applications, which is what made us. But the theory is also important, and we go back and forth iterating. So I agree with that. And I think we need tighter linkages between academics and practitioners. There are a lot of initiatives happening in Europe now. A lot of groups, for example, in Italy and so on. And I'm grateful that we've started some very serious discussions about gender and NetwORks. And also, as we're doing here, celebrating the discipline's greatness, and it truly is about the people. So thank you very much. This is Richard.